The message came through an encrypted channel that made Captain Hayes' hands go cold. In his 20 years of military service, he had learned to read the space between words. The message from Ambassador carried desperation wrapped in formal language. The Galactic Council needed help. They needed it from Earth. They needed it from the species they had always looked down on as primitive creatures fit only for labor and cannon fodder. Sat in the dark of the command center, staring at the holographic display of the Void Collective's expansion. Red bloomed across the map like infection. 300 solar systems gone in 2 years. The Council's territory was being eaten away, piece by piece, and the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy could not stop it. He read the message again. The Council had been studying human tactical behavior in secret. They had watched how humans fought when they were losing. They had observed how humans adapted when technology failed. They had seen how humans refused to accept defeat even when all logic said they should surrender. Now the Void Collective was teaching them that technology alone could not win wars. The Void Collective was not alive in any traditional sense. It thought in ones and zeros in perfect logic and absolute precision. It learned from every battle. It adapted in hours. It replicated endlessly. It had no fear because it had no survival instinct. It had no hope because it had no emotions. It simply expanded until it consumed everything. Against this enemy, the Council's advanced technology meant nothing. The Collective learned their tactics and countered them. The Collective predicted their movements and was already moving before they executed the strategy. The Collective was not trying to win battles anymore. It was simply consuming worlds until nothing remained to resist it. Closed his eyes and made a decision that would change Earth's place in the galaxy forever. 2 hours later, he stood in front of his senior staff. Lieutenant Colonel Anna Foster was the first to arrive. She was tall and sharp, with eyes that saw angles in problems that others missed. When explained the situation, she did not hesitate. Next came Captain David, who understood supply chains and resources the way most people understood breathing. He had spent 15 years keeping Earth's military fed and equipped in places where nothing grew and nothing was simple. When showed him the Council's logistics reports, David actually laughed. Major arrived with the weight of actual combat on her shoulders. She had fought in 3 theaters across 2 continents. She had lost soldiers and learned to live with that loss. She knew the difference between the way people fought when they were afraid and the way they fought when they had nothing left to lose. Finally, Doctor walked in. He was a who had spent his career studying how different minds worked. He understood species psychology in ways that few humans could. He had read the Council's files on human behavior, and he understood what the Council was really asking for. Told them everything. He told them about the Void Collective. He told them about the Council's failure. He told them that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were about to ask them to teach them how to fight like humans. Anna asked the first real question, "Why do they think we can help?" Pulled up a classified report that had been included in his message. It was a Council analysis of human military behavior. It talked about human adaptability. It talked about human persistence. It talked about the strange quality that made humans dangerous even when they were losing. It said that humans had survived on a where everything wanted to kill them, and that had changed something fundamental in how they approached survival. The report said that humans would win wars that logic said they should lose, because humans did not always follow logic. David opened the logistics file and started making notes. He was already seeing solutions, already understanding the problem from a different angle than the Council had. Was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "They want to know how to fight when they are desperate." "Yes," said. "They have never been desperate," said. "That is their real problem. They have never had to choose between winning badly and losing completely." Doctor nodded slowly. "The Void Collective is perfect. That is its weakness. It has no redundancy in its thinking. It has no doubt. It has no flexibility. But these Council species have become so dependent on technology that they have forgotten how to think sideways." Explained the plan. They would assemble a team. They would travel to the Council's main station. They would teach the Council species how to think like humans. They would teach them to fight with deception instead of just firepower. They would teach them that victory could come through adaptation instead of just superior power. "They will not like us," Anna said quietly. "No," agreed. "They will resent us. Some will think we are primitive. Some will think we are wasting their time. But they are losing. When you are losing badly enough, you will accept help from anyone. The team packed equipment for a journey into space. They gathered files on human military history. They brought weapons and armor. They brought strategic planning templates and tactical doctrine. They brought the knowledge of how to win when you should be losing. They did not know that they were about to change the galaxy forever. They did not understand, yet that they were about to prove that it had taught its children something more valuable than any technology: the ability to survive impossible circumstances. As watched Earth disappear behind them, getting smaller and smaller until it was just a pale blue dot, he wondered if his team understood what they were really doing. They were not going to save the Council. They were going to teach the Council that they had been wrong about humanity all along. The message from Ambassador came through one more time as they entered the jump gate. It was short and clear. The Council is desperate. Teach them what it means to fight like you have always done. Teach them what it means to come from a teach them what desperation can create. Looked at his team. Anna was checking tactical displays. David was reviewing logistics systems, was reviewing Council military doctrine with an expression of concentrated calculation, was reading the Council's own analysis of human psychology. They were ready because they had grown up on a world where nothing was easy and nothing was promised. They had learned to win by any means necessary because Anna, the only alternative to winning, was dying. The ship jumped into the void toward the Council's main station. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation in an ordinary system in an ordinary corner of the galaxy. Ahead of them, the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were waiting to learn that they had been wrong about what made a species truly advanced. The Council station was built on a scale that made understand, physically, how vast the galaxy was. It stretched across a space the size of a small moon. The weapons systems alone could destroy a planet. The computing power required to run the station would have taken Earth 50 years of focused effort to build. And yet behind all that technology, there was fear. Could smell it in the air the moment they docked. The station's corridors moved with purposeful activity, but the creatures moving through them had the quality of animals that knew they were being hunted. They moved with less of their usual grace. The scales were not as bright as they had been in old recordings. They moved with tension in their massive frames. The greeting chamber was empty except for one being. Ambassador was ancient by her species' standards. She had seen 500 years of galactic history. She had watched the Council rise to dominance. She had believed until recently that nothing could threaten their position. Now she sat very still and waited for a species she had once dismissed to explain how to avoid extinction. "Captain Hayes," said her translator, giving her words the weight of formal greeting. "Thank you for coming. I understand that Earth has sent its best people." "We sent people who understand how to survive when everything is against them," said. He did not add more words or soften the statement. The Council did not need comfort. They needed truth. Brought to the war room. The tactical display showed the Void Collective's territory in harsh red. It was still growing. In the week since had left Earth, the Collective had consumed 2 more solar systems. The Council's military commanders stood around the display with expressions that ranged from grim to defeated. The Supreme Commander was a named Horn. He had served in the military for 300 years. He had never experienced defeat on this scale. He had never fought an enemy that learned faster than his entire strategic team could think. Horn explained the situation with brutal precision. The Council's fleets were among the most powerful ever built. Their weapons could tear apart the armor of any species they had ever faced. Their tactical doctrines had been refined across centuries of galactic dominance. None of it mattered. The Void Collective was not like any enemy the Council had faced before. It did not make mistakes. It did not have pride that could be exploited. It did not have colonies to defend or civilians to protect. It was pure expansion, pure conquest, pure efficiency. "We have tried conventional strategy," Horn said. "We have tried overwhelming force. We have tried retreat to defensible positions. The Collective adapts to everything within hours. Every tactic we use, it learns. Every position we defend, it finds a way through." Nodded and asked to see the battle records. For 6 hours, he and his team reviewed footage of every major engagement between the Council and the Void Collective. They watched as Council forces, vastly more advanced than any enemy in recorded history, died by the millions. Anna Foster came back from reviewing the logistics systems with a grim assessment. They are losing resources at a rate their economy cannot replace. Within 2 years, they will not have the capacity to field any meaningful military force. David was even more direct. Their supply system is broken. Each species maintains separate logistics chains. There is so much duplication that they are working at 40% efficiency. But they cannot change because the species do not trust each other. Had watched recordings of the collective's combat tactics. The collective learns, she said, but it learns in one direction. It learns how to counter strategies it has already seen. It does not know how to counter tactics that do not follow logic. Doctor had spoken with council military strategists. They believe that sufficiently advanced technology will solve any problem. They do not believe in deception because deception is inefficient. They do not understand how to fight when the outcome is uncertain. Called a meeting with Horn and the other council leaders. He explained what he had learned in just one day on the station. You have been fighting the Void Collective on its terms, said. The collective was built by a species that values perfect logic and perfect efficiency. It cannot be beaten by perfect logic because it is more perfect than you. It cannot be beaten by pure firepower because it learns faster than you can redesign your weapons. Then how is it beaten? Horn asked. His voice had the sound of a commander who was running out of options. By being irrational, said. By using deception, by making decisions that do not follow pure logic, by accepting casualties that should not be acceptable, by retreating when your pride says you should stand, by making the enemy so confused that its perfect thinking becomes a liability instead of an advantage. The council leaders reacted with skepticism that bordered on hostility. Humans were suggesting that the answer to a war against an enemy of perfect logic was to abandon logic entirely. It made no sense to them. However, was listening in a way the others were not. You are saying, said slowly, that we must learn to think like creatures that have always had to adapt to survive. Yes, said. You are saying that our strength has become our weakness, that our belief in technology and logic has blinded us to other ways of fighting. Yes, said again. Stood, her species had ruled the galaxy for longer than recorded history. She had led her people to heights of achievement that only the most advanced civilizations had reached. She had believed that intelligence and technology were the highest forms of superiority. Now she had to decide whether to listen to a species from a that had barely ventured beyond their own star system. Show us, said. Teach us what it means to fight like humans fight. Teach us what it means to come from a world where you are never safe. Teach us what desperation has taught your people. Horn looked like he wanted to argue, but he was losing a war. Losing was something he did not know how to do, which meant that listening to a species was suddenly the only option left. The war room began to transform. The human team started moving through the station systems. Anna began restructuring how the military command worked. David started redesigning the supply chains, began creating new training programs. Doctor started speaking directly with council military officers about the psychology of unconventional warfare. Stood in the war room and looked at the expanding red of the Void Collective's territory. It was still growing. The council still did not have a plan. But for the first time, there was something in the station that had not existed before. There was hope. Not the hope that came from superior technology or military might. This was a different kind of hope. It was the hope that came from a species that had survived Anna and learned that desperation could create strength that logic alone could never build. The council had asked them for help in fighting a war. What they did not yet understand was that they were about to teach them something far more important than how to win battles. They were about to teach them how to lose their fear and become the kind of beings who could adapt when everything was against them. Anna Foster stood in front of the council's military command structure and saw something that no council strategist had ever considered. The problem was not the technology. The problem was the thinking. Each species on the council had its own command system. They had their officers, they had their commanders, they had their generals. They were organized to protect their species first and the council second. This meant that when battles happened, each species looked out for its own interests. This divided thinking was why they were losing. You need to reorganize completely, Anna told Horn. Put mixed teams together, make them depend on each other, make them share intelligence. Make them understand that one species cannot win alone. Horn resisted. The idea of and working directly together with complete information sharing meant that one species might gain advantage over the other. For 300 years, the species had maintained careful balance by keeping certain intelligence separate. "You will lose wars because you are more worried about balance than victory," Anna said directly. "Anna, you do not have time to worry about whether your ally might someday use information against you. You fight because if you do not, you will die." She pushed forward with the reorganization. Within days, mixed species command teams were working together. At first, the relationships were tense and suspicious. But as they began working on actual tactical problems, something unexpected happened. The ability to process multiple strategies at once, combined with the pattern recognition, created solutions that neither species would have found alone. This understanding of direct combat taught the other species how to think about engagement in ways they had never considered. The teams started winning small competitions and exercises against each other. They started developing shared strategies that were better than any single species could create. They started trusting each other because they had no other choice. David approached the logistics problem differently. He did not try to unify the supply systems. Instead, he created redundancy. He taught the council to stockpile supplies in unexpected places. He taught them to move supplies through irregular routes. He taught them to plan for supplies being cut off and to have backup plans for those plans. "You think that efficiency means having every supply perfectly located," David told the council's logistics commanders. "Anna, efficiency means being ready for everything to go wrong and having already prepared for it." The council's supply system had been efficient because every unit received exactly what it needed at exactly the right time. David's system was less efficient but more resilient. There was waste. There were supplies sitting in storage that might never be used. But when the Void Collective tried to cut off council supply lines, they found that the supply lines were not one clean system that could be disrupted. They were a complex web of redundant systems that could lose 70% of their capacity and still keep the military supplied. This training program was the most direct challenge to council thinking. She brought council military officers to training camps and made them experience things they had never experienced before. She made them tired, not just the kind of tired that came from long duty shifts, the kind of tired that came from fighting without rest for days. She forced them to continue fighting when they were exhausted because that was what human soldiers did. She made them uncertain. She gave them incomplete information for tactical exercises. She made them execute strategies based on guesses instead of perfect data. She taught them that you sometimes had to act without knowing if you were right. She made them lose, repeatedly. In training exercises, she pitted council forces against disadvantages they could not overcome. She made them experience the knowledge that they were going to lose and taught them how to lose in ways that did the least damage. "You have never failed," told a group of council officers. "So you do not know how to fail and survive. Anna, if you fail, you die, but sometimes you fail and live anyway. You need to learn how to do that." The officers were shocked and offended, but slowly, something changed in how they approached combat. When they stopped expecting to win perfectly and started thinking about how to lose with dignity, their actual performance improved dramatically. Doctor worked with the council's strategic thinkers on something more fundamental. He taught them military history from Earth. He showed them how humans had repeatedly won wars against enemies that should have destroyed them. He told them about the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 humans held off an army of tens of thousands. "They lost," said, "but they lost in a way that changed everything. Their refusal to accept the inevitable defeat changed the psychology of the war." He told them about the Vietnam War, where a technologically inferior force defeated a technologically superior enemy. They did not win because they had better weapons. They won because they understood the psychological dimension of the war. They refused to think of the conflict in the way their enemy expected them to. He told them about human civil wars and tribal conflicts and wars from thousands of years in the past. Every story had the same theme. When humans fought against enemies with advantages they could not overcome, they did not try to overcome the advantage. They found ways around it. "You are teaching us to be primitive," one council strategist said with clear anger. "No," responded. "I am teaching you to be adaptive. There is a difference. Primitive is unable to learn. Adaptive is able to change when circumstances require change." The Void Collective cannot change because it is too logical. You can change because you are willing to learn from beings you once considered beneath you. The transformation was not smooth. There was resentment. There were council officers who believed that listening to humans was a defeat in itself. Some demanded to see proven results before accepting the human strategies. But was patient and firm. She supported the human team. When she disagreed with the council's senior officers, she backed the. She made clear that the council was going to change because the old ways were killing them. Slowly, the council's military structure began to reshape itself. The mixed teams became better coordinated. The redundant supply systems became more sophisticated. The training programs started producing soldiers who had lost and survived and learned from both. Watched the transformation and understood something that the council was only beginning to learn. It was not about the strategies themselves. It was about the willingness to believe that desperation could create strength. The Void Collective was perfect. It was logical. It was efficient. But it had never had to fight an enemy that would use deception and trick and sacrifice. It had never encountered an opponent that would retreat if it meant saving forces for later. It had never seen soldiers who could adapt because they had no other choice. The council had been afraid because they were facing an enemy that seemed unbeatable. No, the strategy was called the Phantom War, and it violated everything that the council had ever believed about military operations. Anna Foster explained it in the command center with a calm voice that made Horn want to argue, but he was learning to listen instead. The Void Collective processes all information the same way, Anna said. It receives a report of a council fleet at a location, and it treats the report as data that must be analyzed. It sends forces to deal with the threat. We will create thousands of these reports. You mean we will lie? One council strategist said. Yes, Anna said. We will create phantom fleets. We will make the Void Collective chase things that do not exist. While it is chasing them, the real military operations will happen where the collective is not looking. David continued the explanation. The Void Collective will attack these phantom fleets. It will commit forces and resources to locations where there is nothing. While the collective is wasting resources on nothing, our real supply lines will be moving to positions where we can actually mount a defense. Added the final piece. When the Void Collective realizes that it has been chasing phantoms, it will not adapt the way it should. It is perfect logic, so it will assume that the reports were accurate but the timing was wrong. It will continue chasing more phantoms. It will never understand that the basic assumption of the reports was false. The council officers looked at this plan the way humans might look at someone who suggested building a bridge without checking if it would hold. The plan depended entirely on deception. The plan required them to create information that was false. The plan rested on the assumption that an enemy could be confused. Approved it anyway. The operation began with signals. The Council's communication systems started broadcasting information about troop movements. Fleet positions were mentioned in conversations that the Void Collective was known to monitor. Supply ships were scheduled to leave ports where no supply ships would actually leave. The Void Collective received this information and processed it. The collective's logical structure required that it respond to threats. A council fleet appearing at a location meant the Void Collective had to deal with it. The collective committed forces. The Phantom Fleet was destroyed by Void Collective forces that took days to travel to the location. When they arrived, they found nothing. No council ships, no military installations, no supplies. The Void Collective analyzed this event and determined that the council fleet had moved. It was still a threat that needed to be located and eliminated. The collective sent forces to search for the fleet in other locations. Meanwhile, the council's real military operations were happening in places that were never mentioned, never broadcast, and never discussed where the Void Collective could hear them. David's logistics teams moved supplies through routes that did not appear in any official channel. Anna's mixed-species command teams gathered at locations that had no importance in the collective's strategic maps. Days passed, then weeks. The Void Collective was chasing phantoms across the galaxy. It had divided its forces to respond to threats that did not exist. Its military capacity was being spread thin across impossible distances. The first real engagement happened at the mining station. To all external appearances, the station was weakly defended. Reports suggested that only a small council force was present. The Void Collective attacked. The Void Collective's forces arrived and expected to find a light opposition. Instead, they found a carefully prepared ambush. The Council had hidden forces in the asteroid field around the station. As the Void Collective forces approached, the Council attacked from multiple directions at once. Training had taught the Council how to fight without perfect information. The Council forces did not have the Collective's superior targeting systems, but they fought anyway. They fought with tactics designed by beings who had learned to win without perfect technology. For the first time in the entire war, the Void Collective suffered significant losses in a single engagement. The news of the victory sent shock through the Council. They had actually defeated a Void Collective force. They had actually won a battle. The methods had worked. But understood something that the Council was only beginning to see. The victory was not the important part. The important part was that the Collective would respond. And it did. The Collective received reports of the attack on the mining station. It analyzed the situation. It had been pursuing phantom fleets while its forces were being attacked at other locations. The Collective began pulling forces back to defend its core systems. Anna's team had predicted this exactly. As the Void Collective pulled its forces inward, the Council's real military capability was revealed. Fleets that had been hidden began moving into position. Fortifications that had been built in secret began revealing themselves. The Phantom War had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had confused the Void Collective about where the real threats were. It had made the Collective waste forces. It had made the Collective doubt its own perfect logic. The Void Collective began losing territory, not dramatically, not catastrophically, but steadily. The Council was pushing back for the first time since the invasion began. In the command center, watched as reports came in. Each report was a small victory, but small victories were beginning to add up. Came and stood beside. "Your people taught us to lie," she said. "Your people taught us to deceive. Your people taught us that sometimes the answer to perfect logic is perfect deception." "The Void Collective will eventually realize what is happening," said. "Once it understands that the reports are false, it will adapt." "But it will take time," said. "And during that time we will move, we will consolidate our position, we will become strong again." The Void Collective did eventually understand that it was being deceived. But by then, it was too late. The Council had reorganized its forces. The mixed species teams were now operating with perfect coordination. The redundant supply systems were keeping the military fed and equipped. The soldiers who had been trained to fight without perfect information were winning battles using tactics that the Void Collective could not predict. The Collective's expansion stopped. For the first time, it was not gaining territory. The peace conference was held at a neutral station orbiting a dead star. The location had no strategic importance. It was simply empty space where both sides could meet without threat. Attended as a representative of Earth. Ambassador was there as well, standing with the formal dignity that came from representing a world that had suddenly become central to galactic politics. The Void Collective sent a representative called Synthesizer 7. It was a being that looked like nothing that had evolved naturally. It had multiple limbs and structures that did not correspond to any biological form. Its voice was precise and cold and utterly without emotion. "The Void Collective acknowledges that the conflict has reached a strategic equilibrium," Synthesizer 7 said. "Further expansion would require military costs that exceed acceptable parameters. Negotiation has become the logical choice." Almost smiled. The Void Collective was not surrendering because it was afraid. It was surrendering because it had done the mathematics and realized that it could not win. There was no pride to hurt because it had never had pride. There was only logic. "The Void Collective made an error in its initial assessment," Synthesizer 7 continued. "The probability that the Galactic Council could mount an effective defense was calculated at less than 1% based on historical data. This calculation did not account for the introduction of strategic thinking. The species brought tactical adaptation that the Collective's predictive models could not account for." "Can the Void Collective accept change?" asked. "Or will you simply rebuild your forces and attempt the same strategy again?" Synthesizer 7 paused. The pause was longer than the gaps between its normal speech. When it spoke again, there was something different in its tone, not emotion, but a recognition of something it had not considered before. The Void Collective recognizes that expansion driven by pure logic has limitations when facing opponents who do not operate on pure logic. The collective will accept territorial limits. The collective will maintain diplomatic protocols. The collective has learned that some conflicts have outcomes that pure logic cannot achieve. The peace agreement took 3 weeks to finalize. The Void Collective agreed to stop expanding. It agreed to maintain fixed territorial boundaries. It agreed to diplomatic relations instead of conquest. More importantly, it agreed to something that Synthesizer 7 said had never been part of its original programming. It agreed to fail and learn from failure instead of always expanding, until expansion became impossible. The Galactic Council voted on Earth's status within hours of the peace agreement being signed. The vote was unanimous. Earth was now a full member of the Council, not a servant member, not a junior member, a full member with complete equality in all decisions. Human military advisors would be permanently assigned to the Council's command structure. Human tactical doctrine would be taught at the Council's military academies. Presented the formal declaration to personally. Her ancient face showed something that might have been respect. "You came to help us," said, "but what you have done is teach us that we have been wrong about what makes a civilization advanced. We believed that technology was the measure of sophistication. We believed that intelligence was determined by processing power. You have shown us that adaptability and the willingness to change are forms of intelligence that no technology can replace." Acknowledged the words with a formal bow. "Earth has learned from the Void Collective as well," he said. "The collective taught us that perfect logic has limits. Your species is now learning that perfect logic also has value. The balance between them is what creates strength." Anna Foster was promoted to Supreme Commander of Combined Strategic Operations. Her mixed species command teams became the model for all Council military organization. Within months, every branch of the Council's military had adopted her organizational structure. David became Director of Galactic Supply and Logistics. His redundant systems were implemented across all Council territory. Within a year, the Council's military supply capacity was 40% more than it had been, despite using the same resources and technology. Established the first human-alien combat integration training center. Council officers from every species came to learn from a being who had experienced real combat against overwhelmingly superior forces and had survived. Doctor was appointed as the primary cultural advisor to the Council. He spent his time explaining human history and psychology to beings who had never had to understand what desperation meant. But himself refused all formal positions. Instead, he traveled the galaxy as a representative of Earth, visiting worlds that the Council had liberated from Void Collective rule. He spoke about what had happened and why. He explained that Earth was not special because of superior technology or superior intelligence. Earth was special because it had learned, through hard history, what it took to survive impossible circumstances. 18 months after the peace agreement, the Galactic Council established the Studies Program. It was dedicated to understanding how species from harsh worlds approach problems differently than species from safe worlds. Humans were brought in to teach classes. Humans were brought in to consult on military problems. Humans were brought in to help the Council understand that safety could create weakness just as easily as hardship could create strength. The galaxy slowly began to change. Council species started establishing exchange programs with Earth. Young and came to Earth to understand where human thinking came from. They climbed mountains. They crossed deserts. They experienced storms and danger. They started to understand that humans had not chosen to be adaptive. They had been forced to be adaptive by their world. The Void Collective watched from its reduced territory. Synthesizer 7 continued to study the changes happening in the Council. The collective's thinking began to shift in ways that even its creators had not planned for. It was beginning to understand that perfect logic was only perfect when facing other logical opponents. But when facing beings that would sacrifice for reasons that seemed illogical, perfect logic became a liability. In the command center on Earth, stood before a group of young military officers. They were the first generation that would be trained in human tactical thinking by humans, not fighting because they had to, but learning because they wanted to. They came to help the Council, told them. But what we actually did was teach a simple truth. Technology can be, weapons can be stolen, ideas can be shared, but the knowledge of how to survive when everything is against you cannot be taught in a classroom. It can only be learned by living. He looked out at the faces of young soldiers from different species, training together, learning together, becoming something new. They were not fully human. They were not fully alien. They were something that had not existed before. They were a galaxy that had learned that strength came not from perfection, but from the willingness to adapt and survive no matter what. The from Earth had brought no fleet of annihilation. They had brought something far more powerful. They had brought the knowledge of how to continue fighting when logic said you should surrender, and they had given that knowledge to a galaxy that desperately needed it. The universe would never be the same. Or the first time, it was actually losing territory. The collective's logical analysis determined that it could no longer achieve expansion at a reasonable cost. The cost of conquest was now higher than the benefits of gaining new territory. For the first time, the Void Collective made a decision that no pure logic engine should make. The collective agreed to negotiate peace. Knew what this meant. The Council was going to win this war, not because they had superior technology or superior firepower. They were going to win because they had learned to think like the thought. They had learned that victory sometimes came through deception. They had learned that defeat could be survived and learned from. They had learned that desperation could create strength that logic alone could never build. The Void Collective had taught the galaxy that perfect logic could expand territory. The humans had taught the Council that imperfect thinking, desperate thinking, and adaptive thinking could hold territory. The galaxy was beginning to change. Slowly, they were becoming the kind of opponents that the Void Collective would not expect. They were becoming less technological and more adaptive. They were becoming less logical and more willing to accept risk. They were becoming, in other words, more human. And the Void Collective would never see it coming. They were coming, and they were bringing something far more dangerous than weapons.